Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. We're going to get right into it. We're less than a week from the election, and so much to talk about. Not a whole lot of time. The question on everybody's mind, because again, as we've talked about before, Republicans in these races are always cocksure they're going to win. Democrats are always fretting, especially with the PSTD, whatever you call it, after 2016. Are the polls wrong? And even if they aren't wrong, is there some hidden element that we haven't detected that might change the election around? And as we've discussed in the past, even if Trump loses the election, is there a way he could turn it around using the electoral, having legislators, pick the electors over the race, or have the Supreme Court somehow invalidate something? And we'll talk about those too. But I don't want. We've talked about them at great length, and if they're going to happen, they're going to happen. It's hard to predict as to what they're going to be able to do. What I will say is that those scenarios are much less likely the bigger the lead that the Democrats have. And I also want to suggest that we may not have a Trump lead on election night. And then what's he going to say? So because a lot of early votes are going for Democrats, and there's going to be some very instant results because some states are actually allowed to count ahead of time, and as soon as their polls close, they're allowed to announce them, and they may tell us. We may actually not have to wait days to know what the election results are because of the unprecedented early vote turnout. What would you like to discuss first, Chuck?
Well, all of that. And, there's even been a debate since the last time you and I talked. I didn't really need that debate. I kind of look at that last debate as an hour and a half of my life that I'll never get back. But and I don't think it changed any minds. And that's important because we are coming up on election day, but so many people have already voted. There's a lot of the decision that's already been made. We just don't know what it is. As a matter of fact, I've got some facts and figures. And if people want to track this, they can go to U.S. Elections Project blog, U.S. Elections Project blog. As of just about an hour ago today, and we're recording this on Wednesday, the 28th, 75 million people had already voted. About 49.5 million of those were mail-in. About 25.5 million were in person. But here's the key. About 42 million of the mail-ins still have not been returned. So for people who are out there watching this and listening to it, maybe it's a little late to use the Postal Service. Drop it off at a drop box or even the county elections building. And you can go to humboldtgov.org and find out where all the drop-offs are, humboldtgov.org. But we just don't know. This is such a strange election process, let alone the times in which we find ourselves. Just the process of collecting the votes and getting them counted this year is so unprecedented that it's anxious time. It's anxiety time right now because we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how many people are really going to show up in person on November the 3rd as well, or whether a lot of Republicans who may be fed up with the current administration may just decide to sit this one out. We have no idea.
Or how many are crossing over. There are a lot of never-Trumpers.
Exactly.
But there are also Democrats who have supported Trump in the past and may support it now. And are they the shy Trump votes that Trafalgar keeps talking about? Trafalgar's polls, along with Rasmussen's, are way out of course of the mainstream polls. And this time it's a huge margin. Last time, by the time we got to Monday, everything was under 5 points pretty much. Very few polls outside of that range. But right now we got polls. I mean, we had a Washington Post ABC poll today that gives gives Biden a 17-point lead in Wisconsin. I don't believe that one. I think that's way too big, especially since the same pollsters came up with a 7-point lead in Michigan. I don't see why there would be that big of an advantage in Wisconsin. Granted, Wisconsin right now is probably the state being hit hardest by COVID. and that may
Right.
be a factor. So,
Oh, that's a huge deal, especially for in-person voting on Tuesday. There could be a lot of people, especially people who are in vulnerable health situations, who may just decide it's too dangerous, and maybe it's also too late at that point to return a mail-in ballot. So, yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen. Interestingly, though, you did mention in your open there that there are a number of states who are counting mail-in votes as they're received that don't have to wait until Election Day. And I believe if somebody checked me out there, I believe that there are 27 or 28 states that can count the mail-ins before Election Day. Interestingly enough, Florida is among them. So we may have a decision from Florida, which is key to this whole thing, on election night. Right. And we'll see what's going to happen there. I know that there are some Democrats a little bit concerned about turnout in the Miami-Dade area of South Florida, which needs to be big for Democrats. Right. And there are efforts underway to remind people there and to get them out to vote and so on. So, but we may have a decision on Florida on election night, which will be a big piece of information on that night.
I want to caution people. Earlier, you said, maybe at this point it's too late to mail things. Granted, in California, we're one of those states that has if your ballot is postmarked by the Election Day rule, and if it comes in after that, it's fine. However, there was a decision, a lower court decision that was overturned by the Supreme Court this last weekend, or I think Sunday night it was, and. Right. And that was where Wisconsin was slow to get its absentee ballots out. So the court said because the government has been slow, whether or not it was negligent or on purpose, that basically gave a few extra days after the election for them to arrive, as long as they were postmarked. Now, it was overturned ostensibly on the basis that a federal judge doesn't have the jurisdiction to rewrite, law like that, and that because the state law doesn't provide that. But Kavanaugh, in his concurring opinion, let loose, and I'm going to read this portion of the discussion because it's kind of chilling. Just let me read it. For important reasons, most states, including Wisconsin, require absentee ballots to be received by Election Day, not just mailed by Election Day. Those states want to avoid the chaos and suspicions of impropriety that can ensue if thousands of absentee ballots flow in after Election Day and potentially flip the results of an election. And those states also want to be able to definitively announce the results of the election on election night or as soon as possible thereafter. Moreover, particularly in a presidential election, counting all the votes quickly can help the state promptly resolve any disputes, address any need for recounts, and begin the process of canvassing and certifying election results in an expeditious manner. He's almost creating, and Trump has been saying the same thing, this a fictitious federal right to have the results on election night. And by the way, we never actually get the results on election night. They're not certified for weeks.
Absolutely. The Electoral College doesn't even meet until December. So, what do you think that opinion, that passage you just read, what do you think that foreshadows? And don't you think that the White House could have written that? And isn't that a reason not to make any assumptions? And if you have not returned your ballot yet, don't even take the chance on a 6-3 Supreme Court now. Go to a drop box or go to the elections office to make sure that your ballot is there.
Absolutely. If you have not gotten your ballot in by the time you're hearing this, please drive it to a drop box. Yep. Or bring it to the election, or bring it in on the day of the election. Although I wouldn't wait that long, just because you don't know what's going to happen. There are 8 drop boxes in Humboldt County. Make use of them. Once they're in that drop box, you don't have to worry about post date or anything. It's considered delivered and done. If by chance you're listening to this out of state and where there's any ambiguity in your law whatsoever, it's too late to do the mail in. Do not mail it in at this time. Bring it in, take the time to drive it in. And yes, absolutely.
I'm glad we agree on that because I think that I read that passage too. I'm glad you brought it with you there to read it tonight. I think that it's chilling as well, and I think it absolutely foreshadows the Trump strategy. I think they know that they're going to lose the popular vote yet again. I think they already have all of their challenges all written and teed up and just waiting. I think it's going to go to the Supreme Court, which is now 6-3 on the conservative side, and I think they're going to try to make the case that any vote that any ballot that arrives at a county elections office after November the 3rd is illegitimate and should not be counted. And they're going to try to make that case. And with the 6-3 courts, they have a good shot at it.
Yeah. Now, a couple of things I want to just say about that. They'll only make that case if Trump is ahead on election night. The other reason you want to get your ballot in early is that may not happen. With the number of people that are voting early, and and we're assuming that there's going to be a higher Republican than Democrat racial turnout on vote turnout on Tuesday. We don't know that. If he's behind, all of a sudden he'll be singing a different tune. Oh, we have to wait for the ballots to come in. I guarantee that. And so it's that's another reason you want to get your ballot in early, because if Biden is ahead on election night, all of that strategy is out. Now, he still has another option, and since we kind of got into that, why don't we also discuss the possibility that an argument is made to the state legislators where Republicans have a majority, and they say, there's so many irregularities with your election, you need to just choose your electors, and they can do that under the Constitution. The only reason we have elections is because state legislators legislate that into office, but they have the power to override that in most cases. Now, there might be lawsuits in the states if the state law doesn't say that, but that is one of the strategies they're looking at. The Republicans in Pennsylvania already have a quote-unquote commission to decide whether or not to do that. So that's a possibility. Again, I think it's much more likely to happen if it's closer rather than a blowout. I don't think most Republicans would want to go on record as reversing a blowout.
I think the key to what you said there was the word most. You may be right. Most Republicans would not want to go down that road of having the state legislature override the popular vote in a state and select their own slate of electors to send to the Electoral College, whom they know will vote for Trump. However, we're in unprecedented times, and as we have seen over the last 4 years, Trump Republicans are not shy at all about doing end runs around the rule of law and tradition and norms and so on. So I don't take this for granted at all. I am expecting to see some chicanery like that on election night and after election night. So I'm a little worried about that. I'm very worried about the 78 days between Election Day and Inauguration Day. So I hope you're right. I hope you're right that there will be enough Republicans who will say we just can't do this, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be career over for some of them. Do they really want to give up their own careers for Trump? Are they that loyal?
Well, for the last 4 years, they have apparently been willing to do that, because look how many of them are in trouble electorally right now, including well-known names like Lindsey Graham and Cory Gardner and so on.
Collins,
I think that we have to analyze this from the point of view that there is a certain cohort of Republicans nationwide and in every state that have hitched their wagon to Donald Trump come hell or high water. And they're willing to go off the cliff, and so I think that's the reason why we really don't know how they're going to react on election night, regardless of what the margins of voting is.
All right, let's assume that we're dealing, though, with a conventional election where there aren't going to be this stuff afterwards. Is there a way that Trump can still win the actual election in a legitimate way. Last week we talked about Trafalgar's the shy Trump voter theory that they'll ask, are you going to vote for Biden or Trump? They think that they say Biden to a live person because maybe they don't want to be seen as a racist, and which is why Rasmussen thinks it has the success because it's all automated, so they're not talking to a real person. That's why they think they've got their differences, and so then they ask a follow-up question. Well, do you think your neighbors are going to vote for Joe Biden? And if they say, oh no, all my neighbors are going to vote for Donald Trump, then they weight it. I don't think they change it over directly to a Biden vote, but they have their own mathematical weighting. It had some. It may have had some validity because they did actually get pretty close last time around. They over-exaggerated by a point or two, but everything was really close back that time. But now they're saying, well, it could be as many as 5 or 6 percentage points. That's a lot of shy Trump voters. And, as you know, we haven't known too many Trump supporters to be shy.
No, not at all. So there's a lot that we don't know. And as heated as all of these issues during this election cycle have been, I have a feeling there are a lot of people out there in a deep red area who really want to vote for Biden, who are not telling anybody about that at all. And we don't know how many there are, and we don't know where they are. The reverse is probably also true. That's why this one is so hard to game out and figure out exactly what's going to be happening. We just don't know.
There is also the possibility, and one of the claims that Republicans are making is we have a ground game. Biden has defaulted on the ground game because he's not sending people door to door to register people. Republicans have had an advantage of registration in some states, although it's not overcoming the differences. Like in Pennsylvania, I think they've got a little over 3,000 registered Republicans, and I think there's over 4,000, pardon me, I'm getting those numbers wrong, but it might be 4 million. I'm sorry, 4 million as opposed to 3.2 million. But the Republicans have registered over the past few months something like 200,000 to the Democrats 120,000. Maybe that would make a difference and all that. But there's still a big, huge difference in Democrats. There's also the question of how many are independents. A lot of young voters that lean Democratic in their voting register as independent. We don't know. But these are factors. But there's definitely more in several of the key states, more new voter Republicans being registered than Democrats.
Well, let me say one thing about that. Yeah, you mentioned young voters. And I've been the one in our discussions over the last couple of years who was a little skeptical about, banking on young voters getting excited during this election cycle and coming out to vote, actually exercising their right to vote. But I was reading earlier this week a very encouraging story from the state of Texas that probably gives us a little bit of insight as to why Kamala Harris has been in Texas, why they're trying to figure out where and when Joe Biden can get there, maybe Obama can get there. It turns out that, as you and I have mentioned over the last several weeks, turnout in Texas is as high as anywhere in the country. And what they're discovering right now is that 18 to 29-year-olds make up 25 to 30% of the early voting in Texas.
Which is unprecedented. Yeah.
And it is, and that's the right word for it, and that's not overstating it. So what I think we can read from the tea leaves as we see Kamala Harris taking time away from states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin and on, and going to places like Texas, is that they see a group of voters who will probably lean heavily for Biden being energized. And so they want to go there and keep that momentum going without taking too much time away from the Midwest states. So I'm encouraged about that. And, we'll see what the final numbers are. But as of right now, it looks like young voters are stepping up to the plate, and that's good.
We will see. And then the last one, point that the Republicans make is their ground game. They're doing traditional get out the vote, going door to door.
Yeah.
Again, Biden is avoiding that. They're registering. Well, it's too late to register, but they're getting votes out at their big rallies. Interesting story about last night. Did you read about what happened in Omaha?
Yeah. Omaha, yeah. What a debacle. Leaving especially elderly voters out in 10-degree weather with a wind chill and so on, and not enough transportation for them, and so on. Yeah, and who knows what we'll find out 2 weeks from now about who ends up sick because of all of that.
Anyway, they are having the big rallies, and Trump is doing like 3 or 4 of them a day, flying all over the place to do it. Biden is taking a little bit more of a chill thing, does 1, maybe 2 talks a day, is going to places actually outside. I mean, everybody's telling me you should focus on the 4 states of the Rust Belt, or 5 if you include Ohio, but he's going to Georgia and Iowa. Yep. I suspect to try to help shore up the Senate Democrats there. And so, I mean, and there's also, we don't know what the virtual ground game effectiveness is. We haven't really had that before. We don't know how effective that is. So we'll see who gets out. What is clear is that particularly with the mail-ins, the early voting is skewed towards Democrats. The in-person early votes are more Republicans, but not by the same margins as reversed with the mail-ins. We'll see what happens on Election Day. Trump went and did an early vote in Florida, which I guess gave permission for Republicans to do it. So Republicans have started to catch up in the early voting, but we don't know what the early voting means in terms of what the final results are, except that those votes are banked. Those are done. Yes. They are voted. And if the Democrats get their people out there, they've got less people to try to get out on Election Day. And, so we'll see. But I'm just not seeing, objectively looking at it, I'm just not seeing how Trump wins. The Hunter Biden thing is fizzled because neither the the Wall Street Journal nor Fox News were willing to take it on. So they're trying, and even OAN and Breitbart are kind of like, they're attacking the censorship of it, but they're not really covering some of the more salacious and far out aspects of the theories that are being presented. And it's kind of fizzled. Nobody, even most people who don't watch Fox News, didn't know what Trump was talking about in the debate. Even he was using shorthand, and I don't see that going anywhere. People were wondering if his comments about phasing out, if Biden's comments about phasing out oil were going to have a negative impact in Texas and Pennsylvania. Doesn't seem to be the case. There's a slight tightening in the poll average. But not much. I think went from 9 to 8.5 or something like that. Or I might have that wrong, maybe 10 to 9.5. But it's still looking at a strong, even if the polls are off as they were last time, he's still ahead in a lot of the states, particularly in the Midwest. I mean, even if they move like 5 points in Wisconsin, he's still ahead, barely. 5 points in Michigan, he's still almost comfortably ahead. So even if the polls are completely wrong as they were, and pollsters have really worked on their methodology, on their weighting, on their of factors, and making sure there aren't hidden, people that are likely voters who weren't in the past. And in 2018, they did pretty well. So there's every reason to believe that the poll average is probably going to be closer to the truth this time, not just in terms of the national election, which actually wasn't off at all in the national last time around. The polling average was 3. She won the national vote by 2. But Wisconsin and Michigan were the biggest mistakes. And if the same polling errors happen in the Sun Belt, Biden's going to win in Texas because, as we've discussed, Clinton outperformed probably because they were undercounting Latino votes again in Texas, Arizona, Nevada. It flipped Nevada. Trump was supposed to win Nevada. It's hard for me to see. I never say never. I can't tell the future it's hard for me to see how Trump wins the election fairly in terms of the votes. I don't think the polls can be that far off.
Well, I think you mentioned Omaha, and we talked a little bit about that. Think about this. There should be no reason that an incumbent Republican president should have to spend any time in Nebraska at all.
Right.
And so I think the fact that he held this event in Omaha gives us a little bit of insight as to what their internal polling is showing. And I think it means that their internal polling shows that they have to play defense. That there's no place where they can play offense,
right,
because they're in jeopardy of losing places like Nebraska. So that is advantage Biden and Harris all the way right there. That's why Biden and Harris can go to places like Georgia and Texas and on, because they realize that Trump is playing defense at this point, and he's just trying to go. How many electoral votes are there in Nebraska? A few. And he's having to spend time and resources to go there just to make sure he keeps Nebraska. I mean, that tells us a lot about what their internal statistics are showing at this point.
Well, to be fair, and why don't we start talking about the map? If the map goes up, let's home in on Nebraska and the little smallest part that is the second district of Nebraska. I had mine as blue. I have it as lean in the second district. That is Omaha. Obama won it in 2008. Trump barely lost it barely won it in 2016. Omaha is not it's not San Francisco or New York City by any means, but it is urban, and people have moved in there. There's a little bit of a tech industry and the rest there. Yeah. So he may need to go there to shore up that one point. There's a certain amount of symbolism, although I don't see very many scenarios where it's going to come down to one electoral college point, but maybe he just can't stand to lose it. He's actually been there 3 times this campaign. So, but he could lose that. In theory, he could lose the one around it that incorporates Lincoln, but probably not. The first district of Nebraska, maybe it's the second or the third, I'm not sure, but the one that covers everything to the west of the urban areas is actually the most Republican district in the country.
Yeah.
And that's not going anywhere. So that's not the part of Nebraska they're worried about. But I do see. I am pretty well convinced, and I've been convinced for a while, that the second district of Nebraska will once again go to Biden, and once again after this election, there will be talk in the Nebraska legislature of doing away with splitting their margins. They did it after 2008, but it's been such a tradition that even Republicans said, no, this is what we do. So
Yeah, and there could be other reasons for him being in Omaha as well. If you can kind of envision a map, Omaha is right on the state line with Iowa. Iowa is in jeopardy. There are a lot of folks in western Iowa who think of Omaha as the close urban center there instead of Des Moines, just because of proximity. So maybe he was also hoping that he would get a lot of coverage in Iowa, and that might help him both in Nebraska and also in Iowa as well. I don't know. I think he's in jeopardy of losing Iowa outright, and I think Joni Ernst is in jeopardy of losing that Senate seat too. So I agree with you. It's hard to find a convincing pathway. Let me put it that way: a convincing pathway in a free and fair election that's not challenged in the courts for Trump to win this. I even saw a poll recently where Ohio is now back in play for Biden, and if Trump cannot count on Florida, and he cannot count on Pennsylvania and Ohio, and Texas is in play, I mean that's disastrous early on November 3rd.
He can't lose any one of those states.
Exactly.
I mean, certainly not Texas. That if he's losing Texas, he's getting blown out of the water. But he cannot lose Florida.
You're right. Yeah. He cannot afford to lose any one of them, and they're all in jeopardy.
Right. I mean, as I said before, and although he's made some trips into Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin, he really, all of his money is being spent in Pennsylvania. He's got to win in Pennsylvania, hold on there, and then just win everything else everywhere else pretty much, because he's probably going to lose the states of Wisconsin and Michigan. There's not much he can do about it. Peters is back up in Michigan a couple weeks ago. You were worried about that, but he seems to be
that's good news.
Clearing the polls for the Senate, so they won't be losing that seat. And the only states that really there was any hope for offense in were New Hampshire, was Minnesota, and Nevada. It doesn't look like it's happening. Possibly Nevada. There've been some kind of close polls there, but again, the polls tend to underrepresent Latinos. And so it's hard to see that the polls are going to actually be wrong in Trump's favor in Nevada, even if they're kind of close. So yeah, he's got really no offense. He's doing it just because he's got to. He's got to try, and he's just going back and forth all over the place. He was in Arizona today. I think probably Nevada as well. That'll be the last time he's heading back, and he's got to go to North Carolina. He's got to go to Florida, and he probably has to go to Texas. Biden isn't planning a trip to Texas at this point, but Kamala is going to be there on Friday. Which is, I think, mostly to appease Beto O'Rourke, but who's been saying you got to get here. But I believe tomorrow, if it wasn't today, Biden is in Georgia. They're on offense there, also to support the 2 Senate seats. And the latest polls show Ossoff a little bit ahead, mostly. Right. And Warnock is ahead in the special election, partly because the Democrats have seemed to have consolidated around him. So he could get over 40% of the votes. That means the 2 Republicans are competing. But there was Lieberman, who has fallen behind in the Democrats. He's in single digits, so they've consolidated between him. But that's going to be a runoff if nobody gets more than 50%, and probably nobody will. And so
I saw some numbers on that one today, by the way. It was Warnock at 41 and the 2 Republicans at 21 and 18. So even consolidating all of the Republican votes there, and of course there are other candidates, and who knows where the supporters of those other candidates will go. But even with the Republican votes right now, it's 41 to 39. So who knows? I think there's a chance in Georgia, and there's no doubt that's why Biden is there. I thought that was a good idea. With regard to Texas, I did read that there is speculation within his campaign that they may try for like a day trip, leaving, say, Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or somewhere, and just going down and making an appearance during the day, one day before Election Day, in either Houston or Dallas, and then heading back to one of the other states. That's not planned at this point, but it is being talked about, which again, if you analyze what the campaigns do, it gives you real insight into what they're hearing and what their numbers are telling them. Right, and so all signs look good for Biden, but this is one of the most nerve-wracking election cycles I can ever remember. So I'm not counting on anything at this point.
The stakes are high. And
yes.
Just briefly going back to Georgia, one reason that they are hopeful that Warnock could win in the January runoff is that the Republicans right now are both really close. The 2 main Republicans, there are actually a couple more, and they're going at each other tooth and nail.
Yes,
and
doing damage to each other.
Doing damage to each other. So there is a possibility there. Plus, I think in Georgia, the other reason I've got Georgia in the lean blue is that I think there is maybe not a revenge factor, but a backlash factor against the fact that the election may have been stolen a couple of years ago, with Stacey Abrams having lost, with about 60,000 voters having been taken off the rolls, not knowing why, and they tried to go vote, and a lot of them couldn't, and the rest, and that was about the margin that she lost by. I think that there is seems to be a definite FU response, particularly in the Black communities, about that in the Atlanta area. And the lines are not as long as they were at first, but they're still pretty long. They're not stopping voting. And so with that and those factors in play, it could very well be that he becomes the first. Biden becomes the first Democrat to take Georgia since Clinton did in '92.
Yeah, so, I think you're exactly right, and I think that your example there of Georgia fits with what I think a lot of people are thinking at this point is that some of this incredible turnout that we're seeing has to do with Donald Trump for sure, but some of it is backlash for just the blatant voter suppression that's been going on since 2016. Well, and that's been going on for decades, but it's been very blatant, and since Trump was elected. And I think that they with their voter suppression energized the blue states and also people in red states who vote blue. So I think that's exactly what's happening. It's a backlash.
Mm-hmm. All right. Why don't we talk about North Carolina? We might as well we're going to do it separately, but why don't we talk a little bit about the presidential race and Tillis versus Cunningham?
Okay. Well, where do you want to start? You want the presidential race or
sure. Where is the presidential race at?
Well, where I have it right now, I have Georgia, Florida, Iowa, and I've moved Texas into toss-up. I have those four states that are critical to the Republicans as toss-ups. Also, that one district in Nebraska that we talked about. And I have, at this point, I have Biden at 322 electoral votes, Trump at 125, and I have 91 in toss-up right now. And, it's interesting that if you look at Biden's travel plans and Harris's travel plans and where Obama has been, those toss-up states are where they're spending a lot of time and resources right now. So having Biden at 322 right now makes me feel pretty good as long as the votes get counted.
All right. Well, as you look at my map, of course, I've got no likely states and I've got no toss-ups. I just think at this point, we're less than a week. And for me, that's whippy. I don't want to do either one. I'm going to actually say that one or the other. And it's either it's too close to call, but somebody is leaning, or I'm certain. For instance, okay, I understand that how the pollsters are doing it, that it's likely if it's 5% to 15% margin or something. My color coding is based on who I think is going to win at this point. And if you're 5 to 15% behind at this point, it's too late. It's too late to catch up for any individual state, I think. And so I've got not sure about Iowa. I've got it pink just because there's a bit of suppression there, just like I've got it pink. Ohio pink is lean because of the suppression there and because of the suppression in Texas. I don't think the suppression in Georgia is working out well for the Republicans, so that's why I've got that lean blue. Likewise with North Carolina. Now the polls, Biden has never been blowing Trump out of the water in North Carolina, but it's been a consistent 2 to 5% lead the whole way through. And Cunningham has had a consistent 3 to 7 point lead all the way through. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Trafalgar and Rasmussen has good numbers for the Republicans. I will note that Investors Business Daily, also a conservative poll, which was predicted Trump wins in some of the states, has Biden at anywhere from 5 to 7 points ahead. They're not with the other Republican pollsters in predicting any kind of win. But so that's why I've got that. And I lean towards Florida. Granted, there is the turnout concerns in Miami-Dade, but there have been turnouts in other progressive parts of the state that are very encouraging. It's always close. And I just think that there's a lot of enthusiasm on both sides, but I think there's actually some enthusiasm behind Biden, some enthusiasm anti-Trump at this point. I just think that in the end, it's going to pull it out for the Democrats in Florida. Been wrong before.
So what is your electoral total right now?
I'd have to check on that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But the map should magically be there, and it should say it at the top of my map. So,
All right. Okay.
but I'm thinking it's somewhere in the mid 300s. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, and if a lot of my toss-up votes break for Biden, that's exactly where I'll be. In fact, you can play with these maps a lot, and I do have a scenario where if I take some of those toss-ups out and put them where I think they might go, I do end up in the mid 300s. So, we'll see. Let's just keep our fingers crossed that that's exactly what happens.
All right. Why don't we talk about Pennsylvania, because everybody has that as the pivot state.
Yeah.
If you go to the winding path to victory on 538, they just moved Georgia into the blue. It's been back and forth. It's in the blue right now because of the last few polls. But what hasn't changed since June or even before is Pennsylvania is the crossing line. That's where one or the other gets. There it is. I was at 351. That is mid 300. So
Good. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Let's hope that happens.
So anyway, so Pennsylvania is probably the tipping state. I mean,
Yep.
we know that Trump has to win Florida. We know that Trump has to win Ohio. Biden does not have to win either Ohio or Florida. In theory, doesn't have to win in Pennsylvania, but 538 lowers his chances to 30%, which is about twice as high as what they give for Trump overall. So it's 30% isn't insignificant, but he wants to win Pennsylvania. That's where the battle is. There's a lot of early votes happening there. There's a lot of mixed results in terms of who's most enthusiastic. I think that Trump's people were hoping that maybe in the western part of the state they would have a bigger margin of win. Trump's expected to win, in those areas where there's coal mining and industry. But it doesn't seem to have made a big deal or changed a whole lot of minds. We'll see. Biden, of course, is really counting on a big turnaround in the Philadelphia suburbs, not just in terms of Trump voters switching, but people who sat out the election 4 years ago being in there, especially women in the suburbs. What do you think about Pennsylvania?
Well, I'm optimistic about Pennsylvania still. I think he's going to do well in the Philadelphia suburbs, the collar communities around Philadelphia. I actually think Biden's going to do well with some of the Pennsylvania voters who normally vote Democratic but went for Trump in 2016. I think that that particular cohort, that particular constituency in Pennsylvania is going to break in favor of Biden a little bit. And so I think it's going to be that group plus suburban Philadelphia that's going to give him a little bit of a margin in Pennsylvania. I'm optimistic about it. I would not be surprised if it goes the other way, but I agree with you. I think the key in Pennsylvania right now is that Trump is probably not going to be able to run up the score in Western Pennsylvania the way a Republican normally expects to in order to offset Philadelphia. So I think without that, Biden has a good chance at Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, and the thing to say about that is one of the things that the polls are saying is probably the biggest group besides women that have changed in terms of their demographics towards Biden is the white working class voter, men and women. The majority of them still support Trump, but it's a 14-point shift, and that. When combined with all of the other factors, when you know the fact that that the people of color, Latinos are probably going to vote about 2/3 for Biden. He seems to have shored it up after the last debate, especially, and I think because of his comments about the children are being separated from their families and a couple of other things. And with the black vote, I mean, he got about 90% last time. I think 88%. Even if it slips down to 86%, there's not going to be a big, huge change there. But the biggest changes are college-educated women and white working class, both genders, all genders. And so factoring that into Pennsylvania, you've got the Philadelphia suburbs, and you've got this industrial working class vote that is not happy with what's happened over the last 4 years, that maybe didn't vote at all and have come home and are going to vote Democratic this year because Biden represents kind of a return to the union kind of guy, maybe because he's a man. I've said this before, but one way or another, that spells success for him in Pennsylvania, unless there's a massive, turnout and enthusiasm from the Trump base that just confounds the polls again. But the polls have them anywhere from 5 to 10% ahead in Pennsylvania, and even if they would have to bomb, the polls would have to bomb a lot more than they're bombing for Trump to win on Tuesday. Yeah. And maybe they will. I don't know.
I don't know. I know we want to get to the Senate, but just one quick last comment on Pennsylvania there. Earlier, you mentioned the coal industry. I think one of the problems Trump is going to have in Pennsylvania is, a significant coal industry there. Remember, 4 years ago, he promised people in places like Pennsylvania and West Virginia a return to coal, which no one outside those areas believed was going to happen. And a lot of those folks voted for him. Well, guess what? That hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. So, and his margin of victory in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin was so slim that he can't afford to lose anybody. So, I'm optimistic about Pennsylvania.
All right. What have we missed? Do you want to talk a little bit about Ohio? You seem to be a little bit bullish in Ohio.
Yeah, a little bit. I think there have been some areas that have been projected now going blue that I had not expected. The three main metro areas, of course, Cleveland, Columbus, and the area right inside Cincinnati usually go blue, but they've added a couple of places outside of the metro areas that are now trending blue. So that's why I'm somewhat optimistic that Ohio is a possibility.
All right. Why don't we quickly jump to Maine? It's not going to be too much surprise in the presidential elections. I do think the 2nd district is going to go to Biden. The polls have there just hasn't been a whole lot going for Trump there. Yeah. The congressional Democrat there is winning by a large margin in the 2nd district. But what about Collins? We haven't really talked about her, and there isn't, surprisingly, there's not a whole lot of polling. Not as much as there should be.
No, there's not. And there's also not a lot of Republican support flowing into Maine to help her with that campaign, which I think tells us that they've written off that Senate seat. I think Susan Collins is going to lose.
Gideon was ahead, and I think in at least one poll today, about 5 points.
And again, that has remained fairly consistent over the last few weeks. So
all right, Greenfield versus Ernst in Iowa.
Greenfield.
It's looking that way too. She hasn't been behind in a poll in a long time. It's all single digits, usually under 5, but it's been consistent, and that does seem to be a pattern. We think that Cunningham is maybe consolidated, maybe not comfortably, but
yes, right.
North Carolina. Peters will hold. Doug Jones, it doesn't look like it's happening there.
No, I don't think so.
I would say that Ossoff has a fair chance. And if there is that turnout and that blue wave in Georgia, that backlash, I think he's got a good chance. Too early to tell. I do think Warnock will be the #1 winner in the special election, but will he be able to win in January? Too soon to tell.
Yeah, I'm sticking with my prediction that the Democrats get one of those 2 seats in Georgia. I would be ecstatic if they got 2. I think they'll get 1. I'm rooting for Jamie Harrison against Lindsey Graham. It looks possible there, but it's too close to call. I have a surprise for you. If you're looking for something to really keep an eye on, it's a Senate race in Kansas right now, where a physician who is a state senator, Democrat, is running fairly well. And has a real chance of picking up a blue Senate seat from the state of Kansas, of all places. And one last thing as a surprise, San Diego is about to elect a mayor who is a Democrat. They have 2 Democrats in the runoff, It will be only the third Democratic mayor in San Diego since 1971. So again, things are changing.
All right. Predictions.
Predictions. If Joe Biden wins, among the first things that will happen once he is inaugurated is a push for HR 1, which people should look up. You can Google it. It's called the For the People Act, HR 1, which deals with things like money in politics, gerrymandering, voter suppression, and on and on. Get to know it because it's important. So I think Joe Biden will work on HR 1 within the first few days of his inauguration.
Okay. I'm going to say that I'm actually almost certain that the Democrats will actually pick up seats in the House. Will not be losing the House, and will actually pick up seats. Not too many, but a few. I do think there is a blue wave in the making. Secondly, I think we're actually going to know the winner on election night. Maybe not till 1 or 2 in the morning for us, but I do think with all the early votes and the processing of the votes, that and that there's going to be some margins in some of the places that will, maybe I think Biden can actually outperform in some of the polls. I think we will know, or at least have a really good idea who won as of election night. So we'll know a week from now because we'll be back to do our next show. Will be the day after. Who knows if we'll be still reporting on the counting and if it's still going on, and lawsuits will have been filed.
Yes.
But yeah. So anyway, thank you, Chuck. Thanks, you,
Eric.
Matt. And I think this is our last show before the election, so everybody just sort of batten down the hatches, try to not get too nervous or go crazy over these next few days. It's going to be a rough few days. There may be some fluctuation in the polls. Don't look at the polls. Get out and get yourself to vote. And at this point, vote in person and or bring your ballot to a box if you've got that option. Until next time.